My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be Shakespeare and Cleopatra, Video 21, Poem 2, The Pharaoh's Tomb. This is my novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life is Not My Own. Picture of a mummy with two different color eyes, so there might be two people in there, and whatever information we get out of the mummy might or might not be in harmony. It might be in discord, I suppose you could say, with two people inside that mummy telling the future, the story of that mummy's life. Cleopatra's dead, hovering between life and the afterlife. By some strange process, she becomes aware that a playwright is telling her story. Who is this Shakespeare? What does he know about her? What kind of Cleopatra does he intend to create? He seems to be unaware of her presence, but perhaps if she talks to him as he writes, she can exercise some control over the story of a life that she fears is no longer her own. Now, I'd like to hold up two books. Here's one. Shakespeare's sitting and writing, and she's talking to him, and he doesn't acknowledge her. He doesn't seem to know that she's in the room. He's writing a play that I, the author of this novel, and you, the reader of this novel, know as Antony and Cleopatra. He's writing about her. Now, we would feel pretty good about that, but she doesn't know whether it'll be a travesty, a burlesque, whether it'll make fun of her, so she's really worried. And she doesn't speak English, so she can, or read English, so she can look over his shoulder and see ink on a page. But she doesn't really know what he's writing. That's why she's so upset. The other book I want to hold up, which I'll refer to, there's tape across the top, and it's faded, but I used to have my name on it when I taught this book. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I'm going to talk about in my note after I've read the poem about the Pharaoh's tomb. So I'll just hold it up now, and then I won't have to hold it up later. The broadest definition of deepening imagery is that it is imagery which is introduced into a story, which suggests potential meaning to a reader, or to both main character and reader, which would not be considered without its presence in the play or the novel. So imagery that's added in, that adds some potential meaning to the play or novel, and if it wasn't added in, that potential meaning wouldn't be part of the reading experience. One of the deepening imagery devices that I employ in the writing of the poetic novel is the device of the personal poem. Cleopatra has a personal poem about herself. In this novel, there is one verse of Poem 2, The Pharaoh's Tomb, in each chapter of thought in the mind of the main character, Cleopatra. As the text is printed, these verses interlayer with Cleopatra's thoughts about her interaction with the writer, William Shakespeare, and her earlier life as the Queen of Egypt. However, I will read the verses of this poem as a separate item. So I'm going to read only the poem, but the poem does interact with other imagery as printed in the book and as interlayered in the mind of Cleopatra. Let's go to page 5 for the first verse of this poem. The Pharaoh decided to build a tomb. He wanted it to last. He wanted it to last, to withstand the stinging sandstorms of the centuries, to outlast the brutal pillages of time. So we skip other imagery and go on with the next verse. The Pharaoh called in all of his royal retainers. He told them of the vast scope of his plans, a tomb for me and all of my belongings, a tomb for everything that I am. Then we go to page 20. The royal retainers put all their heads together. They asked the wisest men of other lands. They consulted the wisdom of the ancient parchments. They burnt the finest incense to the gods. And then we go to we will build for you a pyramid greater than all that you can see, greater than the greatest at Giza greater than any that could be. Then to page 36. It will hold all of your belongings, hold everything that you own, every person and every object in Egypt will fit inside this tomb with room to spare. Next, we go to not a maid, nor a soldier, not a scholar, nor a cook, not a chariot, nor a toothpick, which will not fit inside this pyramid. Okay. The building of the pyramid, a task of many years, a task for many thousands, all the finest artisans. The project strained the royal budget. Tax collectors did their best. Gold and silver collected in baskets. Pennies wrested from many hands. Every block of stone was now in place, the highest pyramid for all of time. Every item of value was placed inside it. The Pharaoh was summoned to inspect on the final day. The Pharaoh stood and looked at the finished pyramid. Relatively, I'm still a young man. I expect to live for a number of joyful decades. The pyramid will be ready when I am. And then we go to page 89. My pyramid will stand for 1,000 centuries, but I don't want anyone to know where it is. Make the pyramid safe from pillagers and grave robbers. I want the pyramid covered over with desert sand. And then many years it took to bury the pyramid. Many thousands brought endless baskets of sand. The Pharaoh grew older as the work went on. At last, the task of covering it was done. And then we go into this. The Pharaoh would rise early every morning. The level sand stretched out to the horizon. He would gaze at the sand with tears in his eyes. I will sleep inside my tomb for 1,000,000 years. And then on page 114, at last, the Pharaoh felt that life was slipping away from him. The finest wine now tasted like brackish water. The finest cuisine now tasted like desert sand. He felt the sap growing drier in his veins. And then just 2 more verses of this poem about the Pharaoh's tomb. The Pharaoh called for all of his royal retainers, all the men who had brought his great idea to life. I feel the time has come to rest in my pyramid. Dig down and find the entrance in the sand. And then the last verse on page 129 is this. Who was going to tell the Pharaoh? No one could locate the entrance to the royal pyramid. The old and wise from the Pharaoh's youth were dead and gone, and not one old fellow had bequeathed a diagram. So, for a number of years, as I developed my theory of the difference between the prose novel and the poetic novel, it baffled me as to how the writers of the great prose novels were able to approach the depth of suggested meaning of the great poetic plays. I wondered how such great prose novels as Wuthering Heights Lord Jim, the Ambassadors, and many other such books were able to overcome the deficiencies of the prose novel without embracing the advantages of the poetic play. I consider The Great Gatsby, which I held up earlier, to be a prose novel which rises to the level of a poetic play due to its use of deepening imagery. An examination of the techniques of that novel helps to explain how the great prose novels managed to overcome the deficiencies of that form. In that novel, The Great Gatsby, the quest of the narrator, who's also a character, Nick Carraway, is to find out the truth about his mysterious neighbor, Jay Gatsby. After hearing many exotic rumors, while still not yet having met Gatsby, Nick finds himself in the library of Gatsby's mansion. So here's a passage from the novel. This is from The Great Gatsby. A stout, middle-aged man with enormous owl-eyed spectacles was sitting somewhat drunk on the edge of a great table, staring with unsteady concentration at the shelves of books. As we entered, he wheeled excitedly around and examined Jordan from head to foot. "What do you think?" he demanded impetuously. About what?" He waved his hand towards the bookshelves. "About that. Matter of fact, you needn't bother to ascertain. I ascertained. They're real." The books?" He nodded. "Absolutely real. The pages and everything. I thought they'd be a nice durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real. Pages and... Here, let me show you." Taking our skepticism for granted, he rushed to the bookcases and returned with Volume 1 of the Stoddard Lectures. "See?" he cried triumphantly. "It's a bona fide piece of printed matter. It fooled me. This fella's a regular Belasco. It's a triumph. What thoroughness. What realism. Knew when to stop, too. Didn't cut the pages. But what do you want? What do you expect?" He snatched the book from me and replaced it hastily on his shelf, muttering that if one brick was removed from the whole library was liable to collapse. Now that's a passage from the novel The Great Gatsby. Here's my comment on it. This is an example of deepening imagery, as it introduces a wider implication to the surface story than might otherwise be apparent. In this case, it is deepening imagery that draws from the image query of the surface story. By this I mean that the same information is both literal and figurative in its relationship to Gatsby. Excuse me. Gatsby, the mystery man of the surface story, does have a mansion, it does have a library, so it's literal, it's real. However, as we readers think about this information, we realize that we're going through stages in our understanding, our potential understanding of the nature of the character of the man Gatsby. Consider how our sense of the character of Gatsby is suggested and altered by each new item of information about him. So I have 5 points here, and I'll number them. Number 1, that Gatsby owns a mansion might cause us to think of Gatsby as a certain kind of man. Number 2, that the mansion has a library might adjust our sense of Gatsby as a certain kind of man. 3, that the library has what we would call thoughtful books in it, such as Volume 1 of the Stoddard Lectures, adjusts our concept of Gatsby. Again, we're getting a picture of Gatsby, we think. That the library contains actual books rather than a wall which is designed to look like books further adjusts our ideas, so we think we're getting to know Gatsby. Number 5, that when examined, it turns out that the pages of the books have not been cut. Makes for another adjustment of our idea of the kind of man that Gatsby might be. So this last image, that the pages hadn't been cut, comes from the days when books were printed with 2 adjacent pages as a loop. So the pages had to be cut with a knife or a pair of scissors before the 4 sides of the 2 pages could be read. In those days, one would have to go through a whole book and cut each pair of pages in order to be able to read the book. That was just a technical situation. Technology overcame that. So in my numbering system, this is the 5th item of adjusted thought that occurs to a reader who's trying to interpret clues as to the nature of the man Gatsby. Yes, he has a mansion. Yes, the mansion has a library. Yes, the library has actual books. Yes, the books are thoughtful books. However, no, Gatsby does not cut the pages of books, and therefore Gatsby does not read the books. However, to add a sixth adjustment to our interpretation, not only does Gatsby not read the books, he does not consider it necessary, as some other rich person might, for the sake of appearances, to have one of his servants cut the pages of the books so that people would come to his library and be fooled into thinking that Gatsby does read the books. So it's one thing to not cut the pages of the books, but to not care that people can see that you don't cut the pages and don't read, that adds another dimension, maybe, to our picture of Gatsby. A good image makes endless suggestions to a reader, and the imagery of the Gatsby library certainly does that. In fact, it gives information which leads a reader not to conclusions, but to even more mystery about the man Gatsby. All deepening imagery is speculative imagery. At this point, Nick Carraway has still not met the man Gatsby, so if Nick is an alert person, he'll look for other significant information which he can consider as deepening imagery, as potential meaning, as he moves on in his quest to figure out the nature of the real J. Gatsby. The presentation of information at the surface level of a story, of a novel, as literal information, which can be considered by characters and readers as potentially deepening imagery, answers my question as to how the greatest writers of the prose novels have been able to approach the depths of potential meaning of a far greater literary form, the poetic play. In a similar way, Cleopatra introduces the story of the Pharaoh's tomb to her personal story. The intriguing question, though, is twofold. Number one, whether she keeps this story to herself or whether she tells the story to the other main character, William Shakespeare. And number two, if she does tell the story, whether it will have any effect on the writing of the play. So, this is my novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life Is Not My Own. It's on Amazon if you want to look there because there's more information. It's at my publisher's website, roxmillspress.com, where there's more information. At my website, johnpassfield.ca, there are 2 books which you can access for free. The planning notebook that I wrote as I was planning and writing this novel, and the reflective journal which I wrote as I was polishing this novel. So if you go to johnpassfield.ca, click on the cover icons of the journal and the planning notebook, you can read them for free. And lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.